Hello everybody, today's video is about rubber protective half soles, also known as Topys, that you can put on your leather soled shoes to protect them. So today's video, I'm going to talk about why to apply them, when to apply them, which ones to get, where to get them from, and even how to apply them. Okay, so let's go. Hello everybody, it's Robert Powers.
4.5 out of 5.
My shoe collection.
These are made of shell cord.
Here they are finished up.
I'm not a professional. Look how tight this is though.
Very clearly here, I just cut the thread in half.
And here they are, all finished up. Alright guys, so as time progresses, obviously I learn a lot more, and I think I also try to get better at communicating things to you guys. So today's topic, as I said in the intro there, is about rubber protective half soles. There's a lot of different types. So the purpose of this video, I've done a video before, which I'll link in the description, about how to apply them. I'm going to cover that material, but I'm going to go a lot broader than I did in that video, and this video is going to move faster, so I'm going to have a ton more info, okay? So, point number one, why to apply them? Well, obviously the purpose of these things is to cover the leather sole, and it does several things. First thing it does is it gives you additional traction over your standard leather soled shoe. You see similar style shoes here. You see this is a Florsheim Imperial, and you see an Allen Edmonds McNeil. So the first thing it's going to do, it's going to give you additional traction, especially if you live in an area where there is a lot of rain and snow and ice, like here in Northeast Ohio. The second reason is, actually one of the reasons I really like them, is when you apply these things, then when the rubber itself wears out, you can actually peel this off and reapply it. So I'm going to link a video below in the description of a video I recently released about these Allen Edmonds McAllisters that are actually 5 years old. I did a 5-year review, and I replaced the rubber protective half soles for the second time, okay? So the second thing it does is it lets you basically, in essence, keep, replacing the half sole so you're not actually wearing out the sole, and, I keep heel taps on them as well. In case you're wondering, yes, I did create that leather rubber combo heel a couple years ago. So that's the second thing it does. Now, why would you not want to put them on? Well, I would say the main reason that you may not want to put them on is some people just find them ugly. I'm going to come back to that, but let me show you a couple of the different types of rubber protective half soles that you can get, and then I'll come back to what I mean by ugly, okay? First type, this is the type that I started using originally. You can see the Goodyear logo on there. These are Goodyear Neolite. They do come in different sizes. Now, by the way, all my shoes here are 11.5 extra wide, like basically 11.5 triple E. I think I've got the, Florsheims in 12E, a couple 13D, but you get the idea. These large size will effectively cover, even like this, an 11.5 triple E sized shoe with room to spare, okay, in case you're wondering. So that is one factor you have to take into account. I will post here also in the description below a link to these things, but basically I get them usually from the seller is Nordshoe, N-O-R-D-S-H-O-E, on eBay, Nordshoe. It's usually where I get them. Now you can see they're a little bit tapered here at the back edge. They've got this grippy section and then this bumpy section at the front. And they're about, I believe, about 2 millimeters, which is about 80 thousandths of an inch, which is a little over 1/16 of an inch, okay? So the Goodyear Neolites, the main advantage of them is, by the way, they're like a very dense, hard rubber material. What I'm trying to do is I'm trying to get you to kind of have a feel for something through the internet. The feeling of them is like a very hard, dense rubber. They wear like iron. They have great traction, but I'm going to show you the main downside to these things. I've just grown to not be able to come to bring myself to use them. They're just ugly. I mean, look at that. You see, especially the way I put them on Allen Edme, and then it covers and blocks it. I don't know. And then you get this section and this grippy section and then this section, and I just can't do it anymore. I wear these shoes. I've got, I don't know, a few pairs of shoes, maybe half dozen pairs of shoes that still have them. But I can't just bring myself to do that anymore. So that's the pluses and minuses of the Goodyear Neolite, okay? Now, there's another brand that I have used, and these are available from Amazon. Again, description below, I'll give you a link. But you see the brand name, Kaneji, K-A-N-E-J-I. Now, Kaneji sounds like I'm half Asian, in case you guys didn't know. My mother is 100% Japanese. I was actually born in Japan. Kaneji sounds like a Japanese name, okay? But the Kaneji brand is actually made in China. Now, I don't know if you can hear it. It's first of all 1 millimeter thick, about 40 thousandths of an inch, or less than 1/16th of an inch. It's much thinner. It's more of a rubbery feel. Now, this doesn't last nearly as long as I showed you in the redoing those 5-year review Allen and McAllister's. It lasts probably less than half the time, number one, because it's half the thickness, and number two, the material is rubberier. So it has really good traction, and it's actually very elegant. It looks nice. I will show you an example of a pair of shoes that has them on. I would show you an example of a pair of shoes with a Kaneji on them, but I don't have any because all of the shoes that had these on, I've actually worn through them, okay? But they look more like this. They're gonna be sleeker. They're gonna be tighter fitting to the shoe. They're not gonna show so much, right? And they're not gonna have such a thick profile, okay? And then now with these, you can kind of shape them. That's why I like these ones that are, you know, one solid pattern. You can cut them like that, you know, kind of concave. You could also do it a little bit differently, kind of like that, convex, okay? So that's the advantage to those. Not bad. Let me show you the difference between, well, there's one other kind here. So here's another option, and this is actually SoleTech. I don't know if this sound is going to help, but this has more of a plasticky feel. It's definitely thicker, not thicker, it's definitely, I'm sorry, it's definitely denser, and it's definitely more of a plastic feel than the Kaneji, versus the Kaneji has a rubbery feel. The traction is still very good, but this definitely wears better. The SoleTech is 1.2 millimeters, so that's, I think, in the neighborhood of 50 thousandths of an inch, or slightly less than a 1/16th of an inch. I don't know if you can compare it. This is the Kaneji, the 1 millimeter. I mean, it's hard to tell, you know, and it's hard to get it to even focus this close, right? But, so similar, it's the thinner style, pretty durable. Here's the back side of it. I've used this and I like it as well. And I believe this is an example on my Allen Edmonds Park Avenues in Walnut. This is an example of it. Oops. So again, it's got that thin profile, so it's not very obvious. And from the bottom, I think you still have a nice, elegant look to it. No logo or anything on it, right? You can see there's some wear on this, you know, those peaks are wearing off, but it's pretty durable, okay? Not bad at all. I'll again put in the description a link below. This stuff I've gotten from Amazon. Now, you can also get on both Amazon and eBay some pre-cut stuff. You have to be careful and measure when you're getting the pre-cut stuff, because you can see here, let me line up the tip of the toe with the toe there, and the width on this, I mean, it's really not big enough. You see, because if I get this side to cover here, it doesn't cover that side, and if I get it to where it covers the left and right side, it doesn't cover the tip of the toe. So if you have larger feet, some of these that you get on Amazon or on eBay in packs of 2 or something like that just won't be big enough. So you have to keep that in mind. So that's the advantage of getting a sheet of SoleTech here. The disadvantage of getting like a big sheet like this is, if you're just doing one pair of shoes, if you're doing this to save yourself money by not going to a cobbler and you buy a big sheet, you know, you're not going to be money ahead. You might as well just go to a cobbler, right? But if you're doing this not just to save money once, but because you are a DIY person, even if you spend more at the front end to learn to do this, then I think that's the ideal scenario, okay? Now, lastly, here's a brand I've been using recently, and the reason I'm using this is I actually have this, and got a whole other big roll of it. This brand, I'm guessing you'd pronounce it Chic. You see that? C-H-I-C. So it's not obnoxious, but it's got that logo, you know, spaced out, perpendicular. Also comes in a big sheet. And you can see here's what that brand looks like after it's been worn for a little while, right? Now the main downside, or upside, I guess you could say, is, let me compare this to the 1 millimeter thick Kaneji. I think you can clearly see. Let me try and get them side by side. Can you see how much thicker it is? This Chic rubber is 1.8 millimeters, or about 70 thousandths of an inch, or more than a 16th, versus the Kaneji 1 millimeter, okay? So you may or may not like that, thicker, because it's gonna obviously be more durable and last longer, but you know, it's a little harder to skive in and make it even with the leather. You may not like that thickness from an aesthetic standpoint. It's actually quite thick, so let me show you what it looks like on a pair of shoes. So here's the SoleTech 1.2 millimeter. I mean, can you kind of tell, like, even though it's cut into the, what I do is I cut the leather, you know, to give it a little lip, where this one winds up being pretty much flush, no edge. This one's thicker. You have to either cut really deep into the leather, or it's gonna, like in this case, you cut in, but it still sticks up a little bit. You know, and then obviously you can see it a little more on the edge of the sole. So that could be a downside if you are a purist and you don't like the look of it. But the advantage is this stuff wears a long time. Because it's thicker, what happens with the thinner Kaneji stuff, especially being that thin rubber, when it gets thin, it's going to start peeling just because it's so thin and the material isn't as strong. When you get those thin areas, it's going to start to bubble up and or tear from the leather, okay? But this is an option that I've been using actually quite a bit of. Part of the reason is because I have a giant roll of it. So even though it's a little thicker, I think this is a good compromise between something that's flat out ugly and long lasting and something that's pretty but doesn't last as long, okay? With my Allen Edmonds, with these McAllisters out of the Goodyear rubber protective half soles, I got about, now granted it depends on if you walk on pavement or not, but there are days where more pre-pandemic than now I would go and walk, you know, for hours on pavement. These Goodyear Neolites that I first had on my Allen Edmonds McAllisters, I got about 100 wears out of, and the Kaneji I got less than 50, okay? So, anyway. Originally, when I did this video, I was going to put in exactly where I got each of these different things, like with links and everything, which I will still try to provide. The problem I ran into, and the reason this video got delayed a week, is this Chic. I was given this by a cobbler. Actually, it was by Steve with Beto's Leatherworks. Right? You know, thank you. But the problem is I can't find it anywhere. I literally spent 2, 3, 4 hours just searching, scouring the internet for this brand. I can't even find a manufacturer of it, okay? So the point is, don't go looking for this brand, but now you know the differences between the thin, the thick, you know, the advantages, disadvantages. So if you read the product descriptions, whether it's eBay, you're getting it on Amazon, or even there's a place you can go, McMastercar.com. That's an industrial supply place that does sell to the public. You know, then you can get a better idea of exactly the differences between the products. So I hope that still brings you some value. There's another thing you can pay attention to is durometer. I don't know the hardness of these because I, you know, can't exactly find it, but the durometer is the hardness of the leather. So there may be still a little bit of experimenting, but hopefully that gives you enough information where you can have a better educated decision about what you like and what's going to serve your purposes. Now, one of the things that you see in the sartorial world is a lot of people argue about a lot of things. Some people get really passionate about things. I'm going to make a weird analogy here, okay? Did you guys ever see the Tom Cruise movie, The Last Samurai? Now, if you remember there's a scene where Tom Cruise's character gets captured. He's being interrogated by the Japanese leader. The Japanese leader is calling Tom Cruise's character, Algren, Captain Algren, I believe it is, rude for not answering. He's like, basically, he's like, I'm rude. You know, you guys cut that guy's head off who'd been surrendered. Well, then he didn't understand, though, is he was basically saying, I honored him, right? So what's the point? The difference between the Americans' view, Captain Algren's view, and the Japanese view was that if you take two simple values, honor and survival, in the Japanese view, honor has higher priority of a value than survival. Where in the American value system, survival has a much higher priority than honor. They would much rather survive and have a family and things than, you know, kill themselves because they were defeated in battle. You take two values and switch them, and then it becomes more desirable to die than to surrender, right? That's a traditional Bushido, you know, warrior code of that time. So what's the point? The point is when you change values, your entire decision-making process becomes different. That's why we get so divided in politics or, religion and anything. So here's my point. Why wouldn't you want to put these on? Well, I'm going to show you a couple things. Okay, let me show you 2 pairs of shoes that I've been wearing recently. So here's a pair of Polo single monk straps, beautiful shoes. Okay, right? And these are made in Italy. Look at that stacked leather heel, right? A little bit of a Cuban heel. And it's actually got open channel Blake stitching here. But you can see it goes to hidden channel, right? Closed channel stitching. And it's just an absolutely gorgeous sole. I would never put a rubber protective half sole on this thing. It's just too gorgeous, right? So the difference I'm trying to tell you, these shoes, just because this is not a shoe I only wear the shoe on special occasions or when I really want to look sharp or, things like that, right? This pair of shoes is not particularly special. They're corrected grain. US made Bostonians. I featured these in a recent video, right? Made in USA Bostonians, leaving alone. I'm leaving them with the pure rubber sole. By the way, look at that beautiful heel that these things came with, right? Made in USA Bostonians are very underrated. And this gorgeous shoe here, it's corrected grain as well. But this is a Johnston & Murphy, again a US made Johnston & Murphy, and if you can see, I'm leaving the leather alone. If your value system says that the purist philosophy, the traditionalist philosophy, that a leather-soled dress shoe, that a dress shoe should be leather-soled, then you're not going to probably want to use these rubber protective half soles at all. By the way, you'll hear them called Topy often. Topy, T-O-P-Y, is actually a brand name, but it's a lot easier than saying rubber protective half sole. So those terms, like the term Xerox meaning photocopy, gets interchanged, okay? So if your value system is more towards the aesthetics, because let's face it, the more we get into shoes, the snobbier we tend to become. I'm just being honest with you. And I do this too. When I watch men walk, I'll, watch them walk away and look at the bottom of their feet, or if they cross their feet and put one up, I'm looking at the soles of the shoes. Generally speaking, if you see a leather sole, like a complete leather sole right there, it's not a guarantee there are cheap leather soled shoes, but these days it'll automatically elevate your opinion of the person if you're a shoe snob. Now, again, some of you may be like, oh my God, you guys are so snobby, I can't believe you're so... Values, remember I just got talking about that? So I think one of the most important things in society today, this day and age, is understand where people's values come from and why they could have such a vastly different view on a religion or politics or anything else, where the other side doesn't necessarily have to be dumb, wrong, a moron, or a terrorist, okay? Whatever. So there's my rant, my little soapbox I'll get off of, but just keep that in mind. So what you're gonna see is earlier on, the shoes that I purchased earlier are going to have this ugly functional stuff. Why? Well, because I was broke, number one. Number two, I didn't understand shoes. So where function was much more important to me than beauty, aesthetics, or tradition. Does that make sense? So what you're seeing now is, now that I have, I think I have 28 pairs of dress shoes. Long lasting doesn't really matter as much anymore to me because I've got so many doggone pairs of shoes now. Does that make sense? So now tradition, looks, aesthetics are much more important to me, so that's why I'm starting to steer away from, using the thick ones, using the ugly ones, or even using them at all. Does that kind of make sense? For example, I showed you earlier, this pair of Florsheim's, Patina Works Arizona, did that beautiful patina. Isn't that cool? Right? And this is a navy color. Okay, you should see these things in the daylight. But anyway, I left these things alone for that reason, right? Okay? So that would be the reasons why you would want to or wouldn't want to. It's really your opinion. What do you really want? Okay, does that make sense? So now I've helped you understand why you may want to apply them, why you may not want to apply them, and the differences, and a little bit about where you can get them. Let's show you when to apply them. Now, let's just say that I had just purchased this pair of shoes here. This pair of shoes here is about as worn as I would want to get a pair of shoes to apply a rubber protective half sole, okay? Now let me show you one other example. Here's a pair of Allen Edmonds, what is this? This is a Carlisle? Yes, this is a Carlisle. Now if you see the toe here, I'm gonna try to get it. Do you see that toe? This toe has a little bit of wear where, this person walks and wears the tips of the toes. When it gets to be about that worn, this is gonna be much more difficult to apply a rubber protective half sole to. You'd have to sand this. What's gonna happen is if you try to stick, especially the thicker ones, this to this, you see it's rounded there. then it's going to really peel off. You'll have to take this to a belt sander and flatten that. This is even questionable. This could take a Topy, rubber half sole. This one could as well, but you see it's starting to get a little bit rounded, right? This I would sand probably, I don't know, 0.5 millimeter, probably 20 thousandths. I would lightly sand the sole to try and get the edge square. Because you see how the edges are a little bit rounded? That's going to make it difficult to adhere, because what you want when you put these on is you want a nice square sole edge so that you get that. Otherwise, you're going to have a gap there. Does that make sense? So when you want to apply them is when the soles are in as good condition as possible, because you see how these shoes, they're already wearing into the threads. So if I sand this, I'm going to wear even further down into the threads. So I could sand this sole, but you understand what I'm saying. The more worn they are, the more rounded the edges are, the worse it gets. Okay. By the way, this, I can't even tell you where I got this stuff. This stuff is very plasticky feeling. You can see it's obviously got a tan color. This is a pair of, cheap, crappy, I even forget the brand of these, but Florsheim, double monk straps, but you can even get some of these in different colors like that. Okay. So apply them when the soles are in as good condition as possible, okay? Next, let me show you how to apply them. So this is a pair of Allen Edmonds strands. They're obviously brand new out of the box. First thing is, after you've decided what kind of rubber protective half soles, whether you're going to use the thinner ones or the thicker ones, then the next step is deciding what shape. You're going to make the bias line, that cut line here. Now in this example, you see me putting masking tape over the sole, and you can see there that I'm putting it around the logo. I do not want to cover up the logo. Now, you don't have to do this. You could just cut the rubber and then trace the shape of the rubber onto the shoe. But I want a nice concave, I think that would be a concave shape you see I'm drawing, that hugs right around that logo. That's why I'm doing the tape method here. So again, you could cut out the rubber first, then just trace the shape of the rubber onto the shoe and skip the tape. So now, the second step then is to just cut very carefully with this X-Acto knife you see here, nice sharp knife, and this is sped up, but I'm cutting across there, and the knife is going to cut a little bit into the leather, and that's okay. So I am carefully removing that upper part. You see all the pieces at once. That's my template, and I'm going to basically throw away the part that's left on the shoe. I mean, you could leave it there, but it's not necessary. So. Okay, so now I have that blue piece of tape that's exact shape of the arc I'm going to cut. Now I'm tracing the shape of the shoe onto the sheet, and if you notice, I am leaving a good, at least a bare minimum of a 1/2 inch, or what would that be? I don't know, 1/2 centimeter, something like that. You leave space around it. The worse you are, the less skilled you are at this, the more space you want to leave. That leaves you room for error. Now, I've applied that piece of tape back onto the sole, so I get that exact shape, and then what that means is it will line up exactly. Next step is to cut the leather sole. This part is, not 100% necessary, but this is one of the things that makes it look really nice. So you see I'm using a nice sharp utility knife, and I cut straight down. I'm going about 1 millimeter, probably about, a millimeter is about 40 thousandths of an inch, but let's call it about a 1/16 of an inch. Something like that. You don't have to go the full thickness of the leather, of the rubber, but something like that. So I'm going, cutting down deep enough to sink the edge to make it more flush. Now you see I'm cutting at an angle. This part is fairly difficult, and you could really hurt yourself, okay? So I'm trying to get those two pieces to meet, and when you do, you cut out a little wedge-shaped piece of leather. Now, this isn't enough though, because now I have a step. You can see there's an angle and flat. That transition is not gradual enough. I use this knife here. It's a straight edge knife. And then what I'm doing now is I'm trying to make that transition nice and smooth and gradual angle, so that once the sole is applied, that rubber half sole, the Topy is applied, it's an imperceptible transition. Now, this takes a little bit of, like I said, skill, and then I'm test fitting, and
oh yeah.
The next step here is to prepare, actually, leather for receiving the cement. And here you can see Master, it's by Petronio, Master All-Purpose Cement. That's what a lot of the professionals use as well. So this part here, you can now see is sanded very lightly on the belt sander in the garage. This step is important if the soles are used because you want that square, sharp edge, not a rounded edge. And you don't want to sand too deep into the leather. That's why I don't like doing this on heavily worn shoes. Now we're taking that Master Cement. I always start with the sole, the leather sole first. It's going to soak in more into the leather where you cut deeper because the leather is less dense the deeper you go. So I usually will wind up putting a second coat on that little 1/2 inch, 1 inch, that like couple centimeter strip where you cut deeper into the leather. Now I'm obviously applying glue to the other side, to the rubber half sole, but I sometimes will come back and apply a little more to that right there, that back edge. Can you see how it looks dry? It doesn't reflect. That's because it's porous, and that's because it's soaked in the glue, so it will definitely need more, because if this is going to lift back up, it's going to lift back up either at the tip of the toe, around the edge of the ball of the foot, or right there at the back edge by the arch. That's where the rubber on my shoes always lifts up, one of those 3 places. Follow the directions on the can. You can heat activate with a heat gun or hot hair dryer, but you let the rubber cement get tacky almost dry basically per the directions. You can heat it back up with a heat gun, and generally nowadays I do that. And here's where you have to be careful. Line up the back edge first. You see I've got, I guess it would be like my ring fingers or third finger back on the sides. I'm trying to get it fairly well centered, and because once you stick that back edge on, you can't rotate it. So you need the tip of the toe to line up with the tip. Go from the back to the front and from the middle out. Do you see how I did that? You don't want any air bubbles. Back to front and then middle out. Now I'm pressing on the edges there a little bit. If these are shoes you can wear, then you could actually just put them on and jump up and down on carpet, and that will let you press the edges of the sole down. Okay. This part is actually, I think, a little bit easier with these thicker ones. You get more deflection of the rubber with the small ones. I think it's kind of the hardest right here where you start and stop and around the nose of the toe. What you're trying to do, in my opinion, is you see how the edge of the shoe here, the edge of the sole, I guess I should say, if I turn it to where you can see it, the angle, if I matched the blade to the edge of the sole right now, it would be right about there. What you're trying to kind of do is, I would say, just go to, I don't know, 10 or 15 degree angle to that. And the part you have to be careful about is when you get to the tip of the toe here, you may not realize it, that is parallel to the edge of the sole. Do you see? Is about there. So your tendency is going to be to do this, which means you'll cut the sole short. So you kind of almost have to lean, what you're going to feel like is you have to lean the knife out when you go around the nose of the toe. I don't know if that made sense or not, but I'm trying to get it started here. And I'm using the tip of the knife to guide the shoe is really what I'm doing. And I'm also using my knuckle here to push the rubber, to keep the rubber up against the sole just ahead of where I'm cutting. Nice smooth pull, and you get a nice smooth cut. Here's the tricky part. The thinner rubber of 1 millimeter is obviously easier to trim, but it deflects more. This is harder to physically cut, but in some ways it's easier to get it to look nice. I'm going to grab the piece of rubber. You got to be careful here. I'm going to saw a little bit because I don't want to jerk the knife. And I haven't even rubbed the glue off yet, but now when this is all done, here's the kind of result you should get. And you can see in this case, I wanted to avoid overlapping the logo at all, and it's pretty flush. This is, by the way, the Kaneji, that thin 1 millimeter or 1.2 millimeter, I forget which stuff, but the thinner stuff. And look how nice that looks. If you do it right, you get it really flush all the way around. This is the part here, I'm telling you, it will probably take you 2, 3, 4, 5 pairs of shoes before you gain that skill. Just don't cut yourself. Remember, there is a risk when you're always doing this. So just decide if you want to do it or you want to take it to a cobbler. So here's a pair of polo. This will be a single monk strap. If you enjoyed this video and want to see more like it, go to my YouTube page, Robert Powers, and then click on playlists.